Welcome back, Melanin royalties, to another episode of the Melanin Child podcast on Raymondays. It is our fifth Raymonday, and it is our final episode under the theme of traditionalism. Today's topic is entitled "The I in Modernism Stands for Ignorance." As always, surrender to the seas of the fresh chill breeze of the West Indies. Enjoy. In the last episode of our podcast, we examined the entire issue of older generation culture being one of the contributors for fueling the cycle of continuous trauma rooted mental illnesses and social issues which are destroying our community. Today, we'll basically be speaking about the generation which romanticizes these mental issues and not only supports but intensify the gravity and perilousness of these social issues. Drumroll, please. I introduce to you the manipulated younger generation. Now, just because I'm young doesn't mean that I will support all the toxic, reckless actions and behaviors that the younger generation choose to exhibit. As much as I, too, a youngster, may make several mistakes on the regular, I will not glorify my mistakes because the glorification of destructive patterns and behaviors leads to chaos. And why should I desire to add chaos so that is already so chaotic? Anyway, back to our topic. After everything I had to say against the older generation in our last podcast, why would I now call out the younger generation? And why would I call them manipulated? Is the younger generation really manipulated? Who manipulates the younger generation? Simple answer: society. Younger generation culture embraces idealism, utopianism, modernism. What I've really noticed is that a lot of young people today choose to take certain paths and they partake in various activities that are foreign to the societal standard. And the societal standard would basically be what the older generation describes it as. The inspiration for taking these paths would be to escape from the older generation mentalities. Now, that's not a key issue here because, like I said in the last episode, sometimes the youth may do certain things with the intentions of developing certain levels of understanding for themselves, awareness education, and not simply to rebel against the older generation. It really becomes an issue when younger people have the mentality that rejecting all older generation cultures will automatically alleviate all their problems. And honestly speaking, it comes from a place of hurt. The fact that you have systems that are set up in society, systems that are set up by the older generation, and such large populations of people, people from different backgrounds, people from different social groups, people of different ethnicities, people with good and mal intent, all unite in efforts to replace these systems, regardless of the quantity of time these systems have existed. It really shows you that these systems set up by the older generation are full of flaws. I'm not saying where the masses are or where the crowd is, that's where the truth lies. And we will speak about, the crowd later in today's episode. What I'm saying is that the fact that you have so many young individuals, including those who usually refrain from speaking out on social issues, are now verbally protesting against the older generation culture. It should tell you that there is an issue somewhere. So the younger generation now realizes that, aha, the older generation is not perfect. Wow, imagine that. Human beings are not perfect. But honestly, when you make that discovery, it is one of the most electrifying feelings you'll ever get. It's like you found out a secret you were never supposed to find out. Because the thing is, authority is generally associated and laid in the hands of the older generation. Now that the young people finally acknowledge the fact that yes, the older generation is imperfect, what happens most times is that it's like it flips the invisible switch of defiance in the minds of young people, which may eventually grow and turn into intense insubordination. of not only the older generation but of societal standards as a whole. And it just pushes for us, the young people, to rebel, even when there's no reason to rebel. Let me try to illustrate something in your head. Let me give you an example. So, at some point in my teenage years, I decided to question the entire concept of discipline. People have various views on this topic and how they choose to execute their disciplinary actions. But I came to the realization that one, discipline is good. However, the way discipline is commonly presented or the way disciplinary actions are commonly executed are usually bad. But nevertheless, discipline is good. What this shows us is that yes, you have some systems or concepts in society that are ultimately meant for good to improve individuals on a physical level, a spiritual level, an emotional level. But due to the fact that these systems are presented in such negative manners, it pushes young people to cultivate the mentalities that all older generation culture or all older generation concepts are bad and they must be completely replaced. It's like you have a good message but bad delivery. And it's really terrifying that, this mentality exists because a lot of the older generation mentalities are meant for good. They want to see you succeed. They recognize that the issue is society. They just don't always quite know how to verbalize that without being offensive or provocative. But of course, most young people don't see that way. And honestly, I don't think we should be completely blamed because we are the ones who are pressing ourselves. We're not the ones that have the authority to teach ourselves. We follow from the example of the older generation. What they do, we normally follow, and we might tweak one or two things, change the way they do it, but we generally follow what they do. And to continue my example, what we see now with the younger generation is that with discipline, younger generation culture would aim to abandon certain concepts to create or normalize opposing concepts. Imagine living in a society where discipline is absent and all silly rebellions are normalized. It's an extremely alarming issue that young people have the mentalities that everything that's popularized amongst ourselves or the media, anything outside the original older generation standards should be normalized. You'd really find young people seeking to normalize actual, positive, meaningful concepts. Like, I don't think you have to agree with every single concept that is already existing. I don't think you have to agree that there's only one way to live life, or you should just follow one rule or follow this one behavior your entire life. But it's like, just don't take it to the extreme. For example, the older generation recognized two sexes, male and female, which aligned with two genders, man and woman. Somehow you'll find a way to blend sex with gender with sexuality, and now it's just a big ball of confusion. Because if you now go and disagree with one of the micro groups inside a section of the community, you're therefore discriminating against the entire community on a whole. Everything that rises out of the umbrella is automatically normalized, and you're not allowed to form opinions outside of that. It's really strange because I feel like people inside the umbrella don't even quite understand the difference between the three concepts. Another example, let's take relationships. A lot of people oppose marriage, and honestly, I don't blame them because, again, good concepts, often bad representation. A lot of young people will rush to normalize toxic relationships with people who don't value them, but they will glorify it because of, let's say, the lust behind the relationships. And to me, that's just selling yourselves away just to be absent of the older generation standard of marriage. And to me, like, That's pointless because you're selling yourself away. You're literally rejecting one standard to follow another standard that is actually more destructive for your own self. And to my politically correct people, I'm not saying that marriage equals happiness. I'm not saying that once you get married, that's it. You're happy. You're happy. That's what I'm saying. I will say that marriage has worked, and I will say that we should know the difference between a physical and spiritual marriage. Because empty physical marriages are what's often romanticized by society, where you have this big lavish lifestyle with fake expectations and you're both happy. And there's no Jesus in the mix where you could have an actual marriage where you have Jesus inside and it's a genuine relationship. But just to reiterate, don't sell yourself for a younger generation culture, a younger generation mentalities, as opposed to selling yourself for older generation mentalities. It's the same chaos you're putting yourself through. And then to make things worse, you have these Western systems or these big corporations who trick the younger generation into believing that, they are pro youth and they support all the foolishness we choose to believe. You say this and we will normalize it. You say that and we will make it the norm. Because in all reality, they need to manipulate us into thinking that we can trust them, so they could therefore trick us into following their agendas. It's obvious. But young people don't see that because we're too busy being upset at the older generation and finding ways to divide them and to replace their toxic cultures with our toxic cultures. What we don't know is that the trauma that is forced onto the younger generation by the older generation can manipulate the younger people to reject older generation mentalities and trends, to follow Western systems and the trends of the big corporations which oppress us in the first place. And spoiler alerts, that is a trick big corporations use to get you to follow their agendas. They don't care about our well beings, they don't care about our differences. The capitalization of the manipulation and the suffering of black people has been the most thriving, financially buoyant, and profitable business and crime in the history of the Western world. They kidnapped your ancestors and put them in extremely inhumane conditions. They do not care about you or your well being. Wake up, black people, rise up. And what younger people need to understand is that they'd use your trauma, the one that the older generation will put you through, as a means to push you into following the trends of the world and to follow what they may call younger generation culture. Another problem is, we do not really have much of a solid understanding about how difficult life is. As annoying as these stories sound, the stories about in my youth, we had to do this and that. Or when I was your age, I had to fight this out to get what I wanted or whatever. We don't really have much experience of that hard part of life. And that's something we may sometimes take for granted. That's why I think a lot of young people are ignorant. We're fighting a problem but don't know what the real problem is. The truth of the entire matter is that although the older generation made life a little bit more difficult, like it's more difficult to accomplish things now, they also made life easier and more comfortable for us. We definitely, well, generally, have not experienced as much adversity as they have. And in one way, it indirectly made us lazy because we're not really trying to improve life or our standards of living. We're just rebelling against them, trying to replace everything they're doing. Because you already think that they have the wrong way for life. We just want to make our own new path. But it's like it's bad because like we're dependent on trends to feel accepted. We're dependent on the concept of power and superiority. We want to be in control of everything. Even here, you see how our belief in utopianism exists. We think normalizing every single thing will make society perfect. Everything that contradicts what the older generation originally put in place. We think it will make it perfect if we just normalize it and leave it how it is. But I mean, come on, we cannot expect to progress if we just leave everything how it is and seek to never change. What I'm gonna do right now is just state out some topics, some things we need to stop normalizing. Number one, we need to stop normalizing violence as a symbol of strength. It's really astonishing how in 2021 you have to lecture people on how to communicate effectively, how to get their points across the table without incorporating um, guns and weaponry and anything that really endangers or threatens the life or well-being of another person when they're having situations and arguments. When you're heavily dependent on these materialistic things, it really shows that you don't really have room to actually think and process and break down the conversation. You don't really have a moment to really analyze the consequences of your actions, like what would actually happen if you react this way, react that way, as opposed to reacting in a completely different way. And the thing is, as human beings, we make mistakes, and if you react to a situation in a complete horrible manner, using violence already, that's a horrible way to handle any situation. You take it too far. Let's say you just happen to injure the individual, you happen to take their life or whatever. It brings more trauma on you. So you don't only have a physical problem, you have a mental problem. Now you have something haunting you. It just places a bunch of unnecessary trauma on you. So we definitely need to stop normalizing that heavy dependence on physical violence, especially as a mean or a symbol to define our strength or identity. That shouldn't define you. Number two, let's not normalize lust over love. Now, I'm not trying to start an argument with people who choose to have their usual lustful activities. This is not the right episode for this topic. We can discuss it another time. But the thing is, it's just that some people they don't understand that there is a thin line between loving somebody and just having lustful desires towards them. It's pretty evident that most people don't value their significant others outside of, sexual relationships. And I don't know why I don't know why we as a generation normalizes lust so much. Like it's really strange how it's considered manly to have multiple women, but it's not manly to love one person and have strong feelings about one person. I definitely believe that a lot of people they say that they're in love, but it's not even like genuine. If your main objective, your main agenda is to have that sexual relationship with one person, you clearly do not love them. I feel like real love should be defined by actual strong ideals, like prioritizing your partner's happiness more than anything in the world. You making sure that they are comfortable, making sure that they receive your affection, making sure that they are respected and protected in all situations. So I definitely believe that we should stop normalizing lust as love. There's a big difference. But like I said, that's for another episode. Number three, we need to stop normalizing sin. I said it. Honestly, I believe that sometimes we play the blind eye to sin. We do things on purpose, and we know that, this is truly wrong. This is definitely wrong to do this to this person, but I will do it. And because I go to church, God will just forgive me, and I will just change my life, and I'll do it all over again. I rebuke the human mind. Like, honestly speaking, we need to stop trying to put ourselves in this predicament where we just willingly sin, willingly do things against people to destroy, to hurt others. And then because we have that relationship with God, because we think we have a relationship with God, because we go to church, because we have parents who pray, we think that we could just be ultimately forgiven. Not even praying for forgiveness, but just automatically forgiven. And then it's all right again. That's extremely toxic thinking. I mean, the Bible says two things. One, it says that, hey, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. So while you think that you will just go around, jumping around, sitting around, destroying the world, being toxic to everyone you come along with, and you will be instantly forgiven, you're fooling yourself. You're making yourself available to be a pawn of the devil. The Bible also says in Hebrews 10:26, "For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins." That definitely hit me. Like, it just really goes to show that opposing what is right, opposing what is already said by God can just drive you into the wall. And even when you look at I'm not trying to compare older generation culture with the ways of God. I'm not trying to compare an earthly thing with a godly thing or concepts. But sometimes what you have is that you have things that will already set up to praise God, and then you're doing things to deliberately rebel against them. Even if you know that they are good, they are positive, they are for your good intent, and you repeatedly trying to rebel against that thing can really push you away from God and push you into that darkness. For example, I've actually heard a lot of young people say, church will not save you. I'm not going to church. And I mean, it's true. I mean, the church cannot save you, but I mean, there are advantages of the church. And if you keep on trying to find reasons to pull down or destroy things that are positive and who can actually elevate you in life and elevate your success and your progress, it's going to push you away from prosperity and really push you down into a deep, deep, deep trench of stagnation. Our next point, number four, stop normalizing materialism. I do not understand how to tell young people anymore. Materialism is not a currency for self worth or growth or value. A lot of people choose to let these unrealistic standards, these beliefs that you need to have certain things or you should have certain levels of riches at a certain age of your life to be considered successful, to be considered this, to be considered that. That should not define you at all because it doesn't bring actual value to you. And depending on where you are in your life, it can manipulate you to think that you're, succeeding or you're failing. Because if, like, for example, let's say you're surrounded by people your age and they're extremely successful, they have vehicles and houses, and you're just sitting down there extremely dependent on your parents, and you're just, you're not the best place in your life, but that's where you are. And it can really push you into a dark place because you feel like you're not doing enough. You feel like you're not accomplishing much. I think a lot of people have been in that position, and it can be very frustrating, and it can push you into a state of depression. So I think we should definitely refrain from having that belief in materialism and being materialistic in general. The final thing for now that I think we should stop normalizing are mental illnesses. Oh my goodness. I feel like everyone suffers with a mental illness now. You know, everybody's depressed now. It's a trend now to be depressed. Everybody has anxiety. Everyone is suffering from one mental illness or the other. It gotten so bad. It's like the older generation doesn't even respect mental illnesses because we take it so far as a joke. You know, what is there to respect now? People don't understand the difference between ordinary sadness and depression. I feel like a depressed person wouldn't know that they were depressed. I feel like a depressed person would not have the zeal in them, the energy, the life in them couldn't cry out and not even whimper to see that they were depressed. That's what depression would put you through. It's really annoying that almost after any little situation happens, somebody has to complain about being mentally exhausted. Their mental health is tested like no other. It's really strange that in one little pandemic, everybody's suffering from a mental illness. Everybody's having these little mental breakdowns from that thing. Because they're inside, they cannot go outside. I do understand this. It's really pathetic for us, honestly. We've been so heavily pampered that when they keep us on the inside, we cannot go and make out issues. We find the issues in ourselves now. We try to make up imaginary issues. We will turn the smallest sadness and make it develop and blossom into a big mental illness. And it's absolutely annoying and ridiculous because there are people which are actually suffering from mental illnesses and they may not get the help they need because we're too busy looking at mental illnesses as trends instead of actual illnesses. And it's definitely ridiculous. I will never understand how mental illnesses are romanticized. It's like it's an aesthetic. It's ridiculous. But I do believe that we should stop normalizing all these issues. And there are definitely plenty more that I did not mention. Let it be your assignment to go find out what they are and ensure to inform those around you the dangers of normalizing cultures. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will see you all next week. I would just like to leave you all with this one little piece of advice from the bottom of my heart. And this goes out to both the younger and the older generations. The trauma that was placed on us is not our fault. However, the healing component is our responsibility. We must do what we can to fight against trauma as one. Stay woke, power to the people. Good night.